For over 7,000 years, raw dairy nourished civilizations, supported infant survival, and helped expand early farming societies. It was a staple in ancient diets, not just food, but a lifeline. And yet today, it's demonized, labeled as dangerous, restricted, or outright banned in many states. And more people are struggling with dairy intolerance. But what if the real problem isn't the milk itself, but instead what we've done to it? From pasteurization to fortification, today's dairy is a shadow of what it once was. Modern milk is processed, fortified, homogenized, chemically altered, and stripped of its natural structure. And now, millions struggle with lactose intolerance, milk allergies, and chronic inflammation that never existed when our ancestors drank raw milk straight from the udder. So while dairy once was a foundation of our diets, pasteurized milk from confinement operations is becoming increasingly intolerable. So what changed? This video dives deep into the raw versus pasteurized dairy debate. And not just surface level opinions, but science. From immune compounds to the gut microbiome and everything in between. Let's break it down. So what I want to do is help set the record straight and clear up the confusion. Because these raw dairy is really dangerous, these types of messaging just push us further and further away from real food production that actually supports our health. This raw dairy fear-mongering encourages us to accept industrialization, mass production, and food made in a lab, ultimately leading us to a centralized food system that doesn't support our health or the environment. So to begin, we need to understand the origins of milk processing. Why did we start altering something that worked for us for thousands of years? So pasteurization is the process of heating milk up to a certain temperature to kill potentially harmful bacteria. And this began in the early 1900s, not because raw milk is inherently dangerous, but because the industrial dairies at that time, which were new, were filthy. So at this time, during urbanization, cows were moved from rural cities out on pasture to the city in urban filthy stalls. They were fed brewery waste and were confined in unsanitary, filthy conditions. Of course, the milk was unsafe in a situation like this. So pasteurization became a band-aid for a broken system. But here's the catch, and something that many people don't understand. Raw milk isn't dangerous if it's produced cleanly. Humans consumed raw milk and raw dairy products for millennia without issue. So modern fears around raw milk ignore one thing: context. Factory farmed CAFO-style milk, milk from confinement animal feeding operations, CAFOs, or factory farms? Yes, that can probably be dangerous. But raw milk from healthy cows rotated on clean and diverse pastures? That's a completely different product entirely. In fact, a 2020 research paper that analyzed farming practices for safe raw milk production states, quote, "The overall results indicate that raw milk can be produced with a high level of hygiene and safety in various systems," end quote. Still, many people believe that pasteurization makes milk completely safe. But the truth is, even pasteurized milk and dairy has its risks. So contrary to popular belief, pasteurization doesn't guarantee safety. A 2024 listeria outbreak was linked to pasteurized cheese. And in 2019, an E. coli outbreak was traced back to faulty machinery in a pasteurization plant. And here's what the CDC states: 46% of foodborne illnesses come from produce, 22% come from meat and poultry, and only 10% come from dairy, both raw and pasteurized products combined. You are statistically more likely to get sick from bagged lettuce than raw milk. In fact, realmilk.com estimates that you're 35,000 times more likely to get sick from other foods than raw milk. Yet raw dairy is treated like a poison. Clearly, we've been misled. And if safety isn't the full story, then what's truly happening to our milk? So there's a few different processing steps in modern industrial dairy that alters the final product that we consume. One of the steps is homogenization, which mechanically breaks down milk fat globules into tiny particles to prevent cream separation. But in doing so, it can damage the milk fat globule membrane, MFGM, a critical structure with immune, cognitive, and metabolic benefits. MFGM supports brain development, glucose metabolism, and even gut health. Homogenization can obliterate it, replacing it with an artificial protein coating. And this new structure often lacks the same health benefits. And let's not forget about the process of oxidation. Homogenized and heat-treated milk is more prone to fat oxidation, which creates inflammatory byproducts and reduces nutrient bioavailability. So the structure of milk is changing before it even reaches your glass. But the changes don't stop there. Next, let's look at synthetic additives that are being quietly slipped into your milk. So you've likely seen that most milk on the shelves at grocery stores are fortified with vitamins A and D. Fortified milk and fortified dairy sounds smart. Add vitamins, solve deficiencies, right? Not so fast. You simply can't add fat-soluble vitamins to a liquid medium. It just doesn't work like that. You've got to force them in there using very unnatural methods. So vitamins A and D are commonly added to milk and dairy using synthetic emulsifiers such as polysorbate 80, BHT, and mono and diglycerides. These additives are linked to gut inflammation, leaky gut, endocrine disruption, and chronic disease. But it's often not just emulsifiers. Since vitamins A and D are fat soluble, they need to be delivered in a fat-based carrier. And unfortunately, cheap oils like soybean, canola, or cottonseed oil are the industry standard in conventional fortification. Yummy. And the worst part about it, as a consumer, you don't see these emulsifiers or oils on the label on the grocery store. Why? Because they're part of a fortification mix that is used at the processing plants, and they're not required to be on the label. Another interesting piece here is that these synthetic vitamins can easily degrade under light exposure. One study found that within 48 hours under LED light, fortified milk lost over half of its vitamin A content. But even if fortified milk contains nutrients on paper, what happens inside your body tells a little bit of a different story. And that brings us to what really separates raw and pasteurized dairy products, their structure. It's important to keep in mind that food is more than the sum of its parts. Food is not just vitamins and minerals. And study after study proves it. Real whole food in the whole food matrix beats synthetic supplements every single time. There's just something about that whole food matrix. So even if the micronutrient level of pasteurized dairy and raw dairy look similar on paper, the structure of raw dairy is entirely different that we process in a different way. Raw dairy is a complex living system that science is only beginning to understand. Raw dairy contains living enzymes like lipase and alkaline phosphatase, which aid in digestion and overall health. Raw dairy contains living beneficial bacteria, such as lactobacillus and bifidobacteria. In fact, raw dairy is one of the most effective natural probiotics, delivering beneficial bacteria directly into the human gut, improving the microbiome. One study found that after 12 weeks of consuming raw dairy products, the subjects had significantly higher levels of lactobacilli in their gut microbiome. They also had higher amounts of short-chain fatty acids, documenting an improvement in gut microbiome composition and overall function. Raw dairy also contains intact immune proteins such as immunoglobulins and glycoproteins such as lactoferrin, which is termed the miracle molecule in the literature. Lactoferrin supports immune health, fights off bacteria, viruses, fungi, and parasites by regulating iron and reducing inflammation and oxidative stress. It also promotes gut health, protects the brain, strengthens bones, and may help reverse chronic conditions like obesity, diabetes, and heart disease. Unfortunately, pasteurization can reduce the bioactivity of lactoferrin by up to 90%. Raw dairy also contains anti-inflammatory compounds like TGF-beta, a cytokine that helps strengthen the intestinal barrier, rebuild immune cells in the gut, and support overall immune function. It contains CD14, which neutralizes endotoxins, which are harmful molecules from gram-negative bacteria that can trigger inflammation and damage the gut. It also contains lactohedrin, which plays a key role in supporting gut health by aiding in the repair of intestinal epithelial cells, helping to maintain the integrity of your gut barrier. Raw dairy also contains incredible bioactive fat compounds like the anti-stiffness Woolzen factor and intact MFGM. Many of these components are fragile. They don't survive high heat. And the processing step of pasteurization can denature proteins, oxidize fats, kill beneficial bacteria, and destroy health-promoting enzymes. This structural damage has very real consequences for digestion, immunity, and health. Raw milk and raw dairy supports digestion and immunity in ways that pasteurized dairy products simply cannot. Lactobacillus and other bacteria present in raw dairy increase the production of lactase in your gut, which helps to break down lactose in dairy, improving milk tolerance for those in lactose intolerant individuals. The immunoglobulins and cytokines in raw dairy help reduce inflammation and support the gut lining. In fact, raw dairy consumers show lower rates of asthma, eczema, and seasonal allergies by up to 50%. Other studies document that children who drank raw milk had fewer infections, better respiratory health, and lower allergy risk. And in a survey of raw milk consumers, over 1/3 of the responders experienced gastrointestinal discomfort when consuming pasteurized dairy products, but no discomfort after drinking raw milk. And to understand why, we have to dive deeper into the molecular structure, specifically what happens to milk proteins after processing. So heat alters the structures of dairy proteins. It causes racemization, which turns L amino acids into less bioavailable D forms, which can reduce the nutritional value and functionality of milk proteins. It also leads to increased rates of glycation, binding sugars to proteins, increasing the formation of AGEs, advanced glycation end products, which are inflammatory. And it deactivates key enzymes like lipase and xanthine oxidase. All of these structural alterations compromise digestion, nutrient absorption, and the natural anti-inflammatory properties of raw dairy. And it doesn't stop at proteins. Some of the most powerful compounds in raw dairy are completely lost in heat. Some of these compounds you've likely never even heard of. Pasteurization destroys one of the most fascinating compounds found in raw dairy called the Woolzen factor, otherwise known as the anti-stiffness factor. It was discovered in the 1930s by a scientist named Dr. Rosalind Woolzen, but has been rarely discussed since. Dr. Rosalind Woolzen demonstrated that the Woolzen factor in raw dairy prevented joint calcification and arthritis, protected arteries, eyes, and soft tissue from calcium buildup, and was only found in the raw dairy products. The reversal of the joint stiffness in the animal subjects in her studies was only accomplished with raw dairy. The same did not occur when pasteurized dairy products were used. And this compound disappears when heat is applied, and it never returns. This is a reminder that there's more to food than what can be measured in a lab and what shows up on the back nutrition label. Raw dairy contains natural compounds that science is only beginning to understand. And what's even more remarkable, raw dairy doesn't just support your body and your health, it also supports a better food system. So raw milk is more than just supporting health. It's about reclaiming the food system. Raw dairy supports biodiversity in our environment, soil health, and ethical, humane animal treatment. It keeps food local and transparent and non-industrialized. Small regenerative farms that are producing raw dairy products and rotating their healthy animals out on pasture can't always afford these expensive organic certifications. But that doesn't make their products inferior. In fact, their standards often go far beyond what USDA organic requires, and their raw dairy products are often a lot more nutrient dense and health promoting than organic dairy products on the grocery store shelves. Truthfully, Big Dairy fears raw milk because it empowers consumers to choose a decentralized, more nutrient dense food alternatives. Smaller scale dairies pose a threat to their centralized food production model. So where does this leave us? This isn't about fear, this is about understanding. Raw milk is not for everyone, and some people do totally fine with pasteurized dairy products. But if you do want to try it, source from a reputable pasture-based farm with high sanitation standards. So let's remember, pasteurization was a solution to the problems that were introduced from urbanization, bringing cows from rural cities out on pasture into cram-confined conditions in urban stalls. Pasteurization was a solution to unnatural living conditions, not nature's mistake. The structure, enzymes, and bioactive compounds in raw milk can't be replicated. Raw dairy is fundamentally a different food, more alive, more complete, and more human. Know your farmer, know your food, and don't be afraid to question the label. Thanks so much for watching and tuning in. If this helped you view raw dairy differently, don't forget to like and subscribe for more deep dives into the food system that they don't want you to question.